It's so wonderful to see all of your faces. My name is Dr. Sahar Youssef, and I'm kicking off today's Wild Networking session with just a super short 5-minute teaser on decision fatigue. And feel free to join me in my breakout session a little bit later in the day so that we can kind of do more of a deep dive and actually interact and talk to each other about what we actually want to change and take away. Following talking about energy, maintaining and managing energy, using the concept of decision fatigue as an anchor point. I'll briefly introduce myself. My name is Sahar. I am a faculty member over at UC Berkeley, and I'm a cognitive neuroscientist by training. I specifically study, as you can see on the slide, how to make superhumans. So I teach a very popular class at UC Berkeley called Becoming Superhuman, which sounds very, very funny, but really the crux of it is to embrace our biology and use the foundational concepts within neuroscience and biology to inform how we live our lives, how we go about doing our work. Really, my main thesis is that the way that we go about our work is fundamentally opposed to how our brains and bodies work best. So how can we use the user manual really about our bodies, about our brains, to inform how we go ahead and operate? And I know this is something that is near and dear to most everyone's hearts in this room. So I'll go ahead and jump in and get started. But thank you to the entire Wild team and Close Concerns for putting this together. So very excited to be here. All right, let's go ahead and jump in. Foundational mistake on decision fatigue is repeating decisions. Why is this a foundational mistake, and what is the relationship between decision fatigue and energy specifically? Okay, well, I need to introduce a concept called self-regulatory strength in order to do this. Every single morning when human beings wake up, we have a finite amount of what is called self-regulatory strength. Self-regulatory strength in layman's terms can be something called willpower, for example. But self-regulatory strength is something that humans use to not only make decisions, to make good decisions, but also to control their emotions, their behavior, and their thought patterns. You, again, have a finite amount of this. That means, we'll use my coffee cup here as an example. Every single morning when you wake up, you got a certain amount of self-regulatory mojo, so to speak. And over the course of the day, as you continue to make decisions, as you continue to use your willpower and self-regulatory strength to hold your tongue back, to control your emotions, to control your thought patterns throughout the course of the day, control your attention even, you're just pouring out a little bit of that self-regulatory strength, which means it's going to continue to go down, 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 down until you hit rock bottom. And this is when you end up yelling at your cat at 8 p.m. because you just can't handle it anymore. So this is why we have that feeling of exhaustion and fatigue at the very end of the day. Every single decision you make does in fact deplete your willpower. I wanted to share a very, I would say, popularized example of an executive utilizing the concept of decision fatigue, embracing it, and actually making changes, very practical changes to his or her routine. And I'm going to bring up Steve Jobs, which, if anyone's familiar with Steve Jobs, as the founder and CEO of Apple for many years, he wore the same outfit all the time, as you can see. And it was not for fashion reasons. He did this actually after hiring an operational psychologist to follow him around for 1 week straight. As an executive, when he was running Apple, this happened. So we had a psychologist follow him around for a week and said, optimize my life. Help me become superhuman. Like, figure it out, because I have a limited amount of time, a limited amount of energy. I'm super exhausted all the time, and I can't not do the work. The work needs to get done. The decisions need to get made, and I need to be at 100% all of the time. So one of the main changes that she made was obviously optimizing everything that he's wearing on a daily basis, everything that he was eating. All meals were decided in advance. He no longer had the choice between A or B. What's for breakfast? Or should I do oatmeal today, or should I stick with eggs? Nope. All of that is decided up front. All of this is about embracing the concept that, again, we have a finite amount of a finite amount of self-regulatory strength. Okay. So every decision you make is depleting that willpower. It's depleting that mojo. So our goal for today is going to be to think about ways in which we can really combat decision fatigue. The most impactful thing you can do, daily choice audit. This is going through, really taking a step back and go through every single decision you make throughout the course of the day. How many unnecessary decisions are you making? Honestly, as an executive, how many decisions are you repeating? How many decisions are you making over and over again? How many times are we sending an email to somebody that works with us that's literally almost the same exact email? You're just retyping it every single time. So the most impactful would be to do a full daily choice audit. The next most impactful thing would be to actually plan your decisions in advance, either the night before or in the morning. So plan it in advance so that you have, especially on those high impact days where you have a very important strategic meeting or a strategic decision you know that needs to get made, try to maintain and manage that self-regulatory strength. Quick win here: eliminate, automate, or delegate just one decision. These are the three things, my favorite three things you can do with a decision. Eliminate, my personal favorite. Get rid of it. Automate it or delegate it. Do one of these things to a decision that you know that you're constantly making every day. And I shared this with the Wild team yesterday, but I actually I have 3 total Zoom blouses that I have options from, and I know exactly which one I'm putting on. So I'm just comatose when I wake up in the morning. Put it over your head. My breakfast is already planned in advance. I don't need to make any unnecessary decisions throughout the course of the day. Try to see what you can do, and I'm curious to see what you all actually plan on doing. So before we jump off and I hand it over to Kelly to take on from here, let's do this right now with each other in the chat. Let's get practical. What's one decision that you can either automate or eliminate, maybe even delegate? Up to you. Think about it. And as we take just 60 seconds or so to type this in the chat, maybe inspire each other. You never know what something that you are sharing might actually inspire somebody else. Hopefully you all will join me in the breakout session a little bit later. We'll have 30 minutes to kind of deep dive into this. And I'll also be sharing a few different energy management practices, specifically COVID related, specifically related to video conferencing. So if you want to hear more about that, we'll have a little bit more time in the breakout session there. If you have questions about decision fatigue, feel free to email me. Or if you like this kind of research and these little nuggets and tidbits of information, you're more than welcome to join becomingsuperhuman.science. It's a once a month newsletter email that my team sends out with a fun little nugget of science to optimize your weekly and daily routine. Oh, I'm seeing some really exciting things in the chat. This is wonderful. Keep them coming. And with that, I'd like to hand it off to Kelly to take it from here. Keep the chats coming. Let's keep the energy high. I know it's the afternoon for many, the evening for some. It's relatively early in the day here on the West Coast for me in California, but let's keep the energy high today. And thank you guys so much.
So much energy, Sahar. Thank you so much to UC Berkeley's fabulous cognitive neuroscientist, Sahar Youssef. We're so grateful to her for being one of our recurring Wild leaders and speakers. And thank you everybody for being here today. I'm just so amazed by the community we have gathered, and I love looking at everybody's names and faces. As some of you know, my name is Kelly Close, as both a patient and a patient advocate and a leader. I have found that really learning is the most powerful tool we have to improve the outcomes of people with diabetes. Abbott is championed women leaders from the very beginning, and when I was covering them on Wall Street over 20 years ago, right? And it's been amazing to see. And Michael Johnson is going to say a few words to us today. He is now heading up all of the diversity, inclusion, and equality initiatives at Abbott, and it is so clear what a big deal it is to them. It's so clear what a big deal it is to Novo Nordisk, and I know it is to many, many, many other companies. And I'm just so gratified, really gratified. It was not like this at all. Decades ago when I had just been diagnosed with diabetes and I was entering the workforce and going to a job. I think my first job was at the Chicago Mercantile Exchange after I had been diagnosed with diabetes. And I'll save those stories for another time. But, that was not about champion women leaders then. And it was not about partnering, and it is now. So our Wild initiative is also credited hugely to the hard work of our amazing interim director, Lori Bamberger, our associate on the scenes from Close Concerns, Kara Wong, and the rest of our team at Close Concerns who pitched in, especially the inimitable Karen Irwin, who many of you also know. I want to thank all of you. I am in awe of this community that is gathered here. We're registered, I think, over 150 directors, vice presidents, women in the C-suite, other senior directors, leaders in policymaking, governments, and foundations. Each of you is inspiring, and we can all do better with much more cross-pollination and much more deliberate work about what we're going to do less of and what we're going to do more of collectively and at the population level. I'm speaking for me on anything that I would do less of, not any of you, but I am so moved that you would come here today for some deliberate, just for some deliberate thinking and learning. So I'm thrilled to introduce you to Wild and to learn from you all here today. And with that, I am thrilled to introduce you to our first two featured speakers, and that again is Insulet's CEO, Shacey Petrovic, and Medical Director and Senior Vice President, Dr. Trang Lai. So Shacey has just transformed Insulet since she joined in 2015, and she became president and CEO in 2019. And anyone who knows her, it's like she's been with us, who have been in diabetes for a really long time, either through our work or either through having diabetes. It's like she's with us, and it's like she's talking to only you when you talk to her. She's been not only on Insulet's board of directors, and of course as CEO, that's part of her job, but also serves on the board of directors of other organizations, just one now that she's CEO of Insulet, but she's had a long-standing career as a leader who innovates and inspires. And and I can't even say how much, on a personal note, how much strength that she has given to so many patients in the field, patient advocacy organizations, and to so many people working in the field, whether it is colleagues of hers at Insulet, whether it's competitors, whether it is clients. So, and I'm thrilled. She said yes, like in a heartbeat, when I asked her to do this, to share some of her background and some of what she's learned. So Dr. Trang Lai is a brilliant expert in artificial pancreas, diabetes technologies, closely worked MD, PhD that I met nearly a decade ago. She's been a clinical professor at Stanford, pediatric endocrinologist in Australia. Then she moved to Insulet, took over the work as running the medical group there, and she has been amazing watching Insulet join the other organizations that we're working very, very closely on the closed loop. And we're so excited about what Insulet is doing on that front, and also what she does as an example for other women leaders, and their relationship is really, really cool. So I'm gonna hand it over to them, and just to say thank you so much to them. Trang has also probably seen me at every single blood sugar that I could possibly be. So on a personal note to her, so much leadership and handing it off. Thank you so much again, Shacey, and you're gonna start us off, I think.
Great. Kelly, thank you very much for the kind introduction. That's quite something. And I am thrilled to be here. It's quite an honor, actually, to have been invited to kick this fabulous event off and to be in the company of the Wild Network. And it has been a busy year. Obviously, we've been running companies, and all of us have been working at companies during times of social unrest and raging pandemics, but it is literally impossible to say no to Kelly Close. So to her point, I didn't even try. And here I am. And in all seriousness, I am absolutely delighted to be here and to be joined by Dr. Trang Lai. You know, in preparing for the keynote, the team suggested that I share some advice to aspiring leaders. Some team members suggested that I give more personal insight into my career path, or that I provide some key learnings from this very strange and remarkable year that we're all closing. And so I'm going to try to do a little bit of each of those over the next 10 minutes, and then Trang and I will answer all your burning questions. Many people ask me for advice. And one of my simplest and most sincere and maybe least expected pieces of advice for aspiring leaders is to read as much as you can, and to be one of the 30% of people who read more than one book last year. Reading is mental fitness. It's a workout for your brain. And I think you just cannot get enough intelligent information without a steady diet of articles, commentary, closer look reviews, and most importantly, books. Readers do better in school. They earn more money. They are better citizens, have happier personal lives, and are more actively engaged in the world around us. My adolescent love of science fiction and fantasy, where heroes and heroines leave sleepy lives to conquer new worlds, I think, at least in part, prompted me to take my first international post in Europe and to, want to explore new cultures and see how I could lead in them. In our work, in our industry, and as leaders of our organizations, it's so important to be able to communicate clearly and with impact. And I credit classics like Strunk and White's Elements of Style and Robert McKee's Story for helping me to hone those critical skills. I also remember Emperor of All Maladies, which is an exhaustive biography of cancer and all its complexity. It had me contemplating illness and compassion for months after I read it. And I think perhaps eventually prompted me to join the board of Exact Sciences. And the list goes on. Books get our minds out there into the world of ideas, and where our brains go, our bodies follow. And books have helped me to be a more thoughtful, more aspirational leader, which I think has been particularly valuable in this challenging year. I just finished a terrific book, The Splendid and the Vile by Erik Larson. So if we were all together, I would ask you to raise your hand to let me know that you'd read it. So maybe you'll do that at home. But I highly recommend it. It's just an incredible book, an incredible recount of Winston Churchill's first 8 months in office. On Churchill's first day as prime minister, Adolf Hitler invaded Holland and Belgium, and Poland and Czechoslovakia had already fallen, and the Dunkirk evacuation was just 2 weeks away. Over the coming next several months, he essentially leads Great Britain and the free world through what is a seemingly unwinnable war with just endless energy and courage, relentless in his efforts to convince Roosevelt and the Americans to join the war. And he often did this from his bathtub at Checkers with a cocktail in one hand and a cigar in the other. So I highly, highly recommend it, the book. And Churchill and I have something in common, and it is not the love of a stiff drink and a long path. We are both eternal, ruthless optimists. Despite some significant challenges early on at Insulet, which probably many of you in our industry are familiar with, I really never wavered in my belief that we would make our mark. And while clearly my life's work will not rival even Churchill's first month as prime minister, as I read The Splendid and the Vile last few years at Insulet, when Churchill took office, he immediately installed his most trusted advisors into key cabinet positions to really shake things up. In some of these cases, his choices were unorthodox. For example, he made a newspaper baron his minister of aircraft production. And similarly at Insulet, we recognized early that we were going to have to find a different sort of leader over many of our functions, particularly operations. Because our business depends on very high volume, very complex manufacturing. We jokingly refer to it as manufacturing millions of Swiss watches that people throw away every 3 days. And now we make almost 50 million pods each year. And in fact, our chief operating officer, when we finally found him, had never worked in life sciences. He joined us after 30 years at PepsiCo, of all places. I like to think that similar to Churchill's wartime cabinet, at Insulet, we have built the best executive team in the business, deeply experienced, dedicated, mission-focused. And sometimes that has meant looking further afield for the right leaders, like Pepsi, or to Kelly's point earlier, like Stanford by way of Perth, Australia, for a first-time medical director who has made an incredible impact on our innovation programs. There is a great Churchill quote that when I read it struck me as summing up the last few years at Insulet and seems uncannily relevant to today. Churchill said, quote, "Never let a good crisis go to waste." And if ever there has been a year of opportunities cloaked as crises, it's 2020. These are learning opportunities, times to crystallize our commitments to our missions, even in the toughest of circumstances, And I think these are opportunities to rethink fundamental assumptions and ways of doing things. So I thought I would share to close just a few of the things that we've learned over the last year, leading through Insulet's hypergrowth, through this incredible social reckoning, and through this pandemic. And I really have four key learnings. One, we are all capable of much more than we think we are. Two, we must insist on recovery after sprints. Three, we should be thinking a lot bigger than we are today. And four, take care of your health above all other things. So first, we are all more capable than we think we are. This is true, I think, individually and collectively. I think about the fact that this pandemic has forced us to move to overnight remote work models, to create new business models. I mean, it's just incredible. I was reflecting that overnight at Insulet, we moved almost 2,000 people from very traditional working arrangements to remote work. And if I had told the company that we were going to have to move 2,000 people from offices to the field overnight, people would have told me it was going to take months, it was going to cost a few $1 million, and probably 10% of the team would have told me that it could not be done. And instead, overnight, we did it. That's true at home too, right? Most of us have become teachers and problem solvers and jugglers like never before. I think if you look at what we've seen scientists and regulators achieve, just the extraordinary, breathtaking speed at which we have created, now cleared, and starting early distribution of these vaccines, it is unbelievable. So this year has been a great reminder that when we need to, we can all accomplish much more than we ever think is possible. Of course, this hasn't been easy, and that leads me to my second learning, which is that as leaders and as individuals, we need to insist on recovery. I think at Insulet, we often describe our business and our teams and our organization as a marathon of sprints. And that was even amplified this year. We have very much a culture of achievement and execution that is something we're all incredibly proud of. But this year, we've seen how important it is to insist on recovery and reflection between our program sprints, a sort of slowing down to speed up, really taking time to reflect on key learnings, to celebrate progress, and to recover. And I think this is true personally as well. As work bleeds into life, bleeds into work, we have to insist on recovery for ourselves, whatever this means to you. And for me, it's yoga and time with friends and family and getting outside and books and reading. Third, we should be thinking bigger than we are. When I joined Insulet 6 years ago now, to Kelly's point, it has been a remarkable 6 years. But 6 years ago, Insulet was 150 employees in one rented location in Billerica, Massachusetts. Today, just 6 years later, we are almost 2,000 employees in locations across the globe. Our roots are really small at Insulet, and sometimes we pride ourselves on still feeling like an entrepreneurial startup. But this year's events have forced us to think more holistically about who we are and what we believe in, and to determine during these kind of unsettling times, what is our role in our communities and what do we truly stand for? We at Insulet have always been connected to our mission to improve the lives of people with diabetes. But this year we've had to ask, what does that even mean when Black people don't feel safe in their own homes and when we are at war with a pandemic? As leaders, it has never been more important for all of our stakeholders to connect our organization's missions to the even bigger picture beyond what we're all focused on our daily jobs. And finally, personally, as I guess many of us have, I've come away from these last several months with a much starker perspective on what is truly important. At Insulet, that has meant honing in on our three most urgent priorities. We want to keep our people safe and healthy. We want to preserve the well-being of our communities, and we want to get pods to people who need them. for me personally, when I think about my personal priorities, the year has really highlighted that health, both mental and physical health for myself and for my loved ones, is fundamental. If we can nurture our health, then we have our ability to make our mark in the world. But it does start there. And so we cannot take our health for granted. And how wonderful that everybody here today is connected to the mission of bringing good health to the world. So books can help us with each of these learnings. Books can help us imagine bigger, better things and aspire for more. They are a wonderful recovery tool and a great resource for insights on mental and physical health. And as Churchill said, books in all their variety offer the human intellect the means whereby civilization may be carried triumphantly forward. So I appreciate the time to share some thoughts and reflections with all of you. Trang is going to join me, and I think she is going to facilitate some questions here, and then we will open for any questions from the audience.
So I'm here to ask Shacey some fun questions, but please feel free to enter them into the chat, and Kelly will join us for some more questions as well. So I am so lucky to be able to work with Shacey and get to know you over the last 4 years. So I'm going to ask you a few more personal questions just so that the audience gets to know you a little bit more. So my first question for you is, can you describe your best day at Insulet since you've been here?
So, Trang, first of all, I think the audience would probably appreciate your perspective on some of these questions as well. So I hope you weigh in. It's really not about a single day. I can remember many days, but and I clearly remember the first day we met at ADA now 3 or almost 4 years ago. But it is about seeing our efforts and our investments and strategies play out and make an impact consistently over the years. I think as I look back, I think about the work that has gone into, just as one example, our strategy to bring pods to people with no upfront cost, regular co-pays, make it more affordable. That was a strategy that was 3 years in research and development, and then, 1.5 years in deployment. And so many happy days as we kind of saw that work start to come to fruition and start to see more people get access to pods and more people be able to afford them. So I think, and that's one example of so many. To me, it's just about the consistency of performance and being able to look back and contemplate where we were, 5, 6 years ago. I think it's been 3 years since you've joined us, a little over 3 years. You think about that. When you joined us, we had the nucleus, a very small nucleus of an artificial pancreas research program. And now we're on the cusp of launching that technology. So it really is about the kind of the sum of all the days, not one day.
Yeah, I would say the best day for me was pretty remarkable, was the day that we put Omnipod 5 on a patient who could take it home. So our pre-pivotal studies, that was just a really incredible day. All of the work that we had done, all the feasibility studies, and then be able to put a system where the algorithm was actually on the pod on a patient. She was actually one of my former patients at Stanford, and be able to send her home was just extraordinary, and was really the culmination of everything that I'd hoped that I could do as her clinician. I was able to do through Omnipod 5. So that was pretty remarkable for me. But I would say, another really extraordinary day was when when we had a physician actually ask us if we could help out this patient who had diabetes after developing a complication from their cancer therapy. And she was admitted and she was uninsured. And he asked me, whether we would provide pods. And, I asked the team, and, there were all these medical legal compliance issues. but somehow like we made that happen, that we could provide pods. And, you know, that just made me so proud to be able to work for a company that could just do that without, you know, us having to, you know, do much to intervene in the process. So I thought that was a really cool day.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. Shacey, can you share with the audience what it's like to lead your very first board of directors meeting?
Trang, that's great. I don't even think that was on the prepared list of questions, so you're taking me by surprise. But you know, I am very fortunate. I'm in a lucky position. Not, you know, I was a CEO before I joined Insulet, and any CEO coming into their business assesses their team, assesses their board, assesses their portfolio of businesses or their portfolio of products, and then draws conclusions, builds strategies and action plans to implement. And you don't know what you're getting yourself into. But with Insulet, I was so fortunate because I had spent 3 years with the company really getting to know the team. I was able to discuss with my predecessor, you know, where our perspectives agreed, where they were different in terms of changes to be made across the company, evolution in terms of the board. And I joined the board almost a year before I became CEO. And so lots of time to observe and prepare and kind of be able to see how the mechanics worked. So I would say my first board meeting was a bit of a non-event because I had gotten to know the directors very well. You know, it was really about laying out where I saw the strategy and the capability building and the direction needed to, in my opinion, course correct a little bit and how I was going to focus on that. And we're very fortunate to have an incredible board of very supportive and very wise counselors essentially for us. So I look to them for guidance and support. And I feel like it's been a great thing. And I don't view a board meeting necessarily as different from, you know, other advisory board meetings that we have. That's really what we're looking for, is their counsel and support and pushback where necessary.
Yeah, that's great. I also, you know, we run scientific advisory boards, and I tell the team the same thing. You know, these are a group of people that are our brains trust, and we look to them for advice, and we should be articulating the questions to ensure that, you know, they're helping us make the best decisions for the community. I do, you know, you and I have interviewed a number of people together. We've been on the interview panel, and I'd say sometimes we have quite disparate views on people. What, you know, you've liked them and I've not liked them, and vice versa. What do you look for in people, and how do you spot talent?
Sure. So the first thing I'll say is that that's why we do slate interviews, right? Panel interviews, is because the diversity of opinion and perspective helps us land on the best decision for the company. And that diversity of opinion, that ability to be candid and push back and express our points of views is so important to getting to the right answer. In terms of what I look for, you know, at this point, I'm really counting on others on the team to interview for technical capability. And I am interviewing primarily for cultural fit for the organization. And, you know, we're at such an interesting point at Insulet. I always refer to our company as sort of a teenager of sorts. And so we do need leaders who can grow with us. And the growth happens very quickly because we're in this hyper growth mode. But we need leaders who will also roll up their hands and roll up their sleeves rather, and not rely on others. So I generally look for low ego, and I look for continuous learners. And many times I'm looking for somebody who will bring a different thought dimension or a diversity of experience, diversity of approach to our executive team. And I mentioned it earlier, and I know you know this, Trang, but our executive team is a very sort of execution, achievement-oriented executive team. And so as we think about wanting to bring different dimensions, it really is about adding diversity to that strength that we have on our team.
Do you think where Insulet is now, that the risks are higher? Like, would you have hired with such a great risk now compared to say 4 or 5 years ago, where the stakes were maybe a little bit lower?
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's funny, right? In some ways we have more to lose, but I always say that we have turned the page on, from playing to survive to playing to win. And when you're playing to survive, you do make different decisions and you do probably swing a little bit harder and farther. Your back is up against the wall a little bit. And so to some degree, you do take different risks, but I think the risks are just as big today. Because now, if you think about the volume of people that are relying on us across the globe to do what we do well, it is, 6, 7-fold what it was when you joined the organization. So there's more people counting on us, more employees counting on us to build a strong, lasting business, certainly more patients relying on us to continue to innovate and continue to push the market forward. So I think the risks are different, but just as important and just as big. And we have to challenge ourselves. I actually think that's where executive teams can go wrong is, you do challenge yourselves significantly in the beginning. And sometimes you don't take the big swings as much. And so we have various mechanisms that you know about at Insulet to make sure that we continue to take the big swings.
Great. Okay, just moving to some more personal questions. When did you start feeling less of an outsider at Insulet? And when did you start feeling like you really belonged?
Candidly, it took some change in the organization for me to feel more comfortable there. When I arrived, what I always did when I come into a business, I spent a lot of time in the field with our most tenured reps, spent a lot of time with patients and with clinicians. And what I saw was a pretty big disconnect between what was being experienced by patients in terms of the quality and performance of the product and what we were being reported out to in terms of product experience, product quality metrics. And that was alarming to me. And so I was concerned that there wasn't more sense of urgency around that. And so, first thing we did was mandate that every executive had to get out into the field. I kept saying, every day we spend here, we're getting dumber. You guys have to get closer to the customers. And that started to change course, but really it was about hiring leaders who saw the picture more clearly and that were capable of really fixing some of the challenges and then setting in place infrastructure, operating mechanisms that would ensure we could scale and continue to raise the bar on quality and customer experience. So that took a good 18 months before I was truly convinced that we were going to be able to make our mark and turn the ship around. How about you?
Oh gosh.
And you came from, academic and research into this very fast-paced industry, commercial environment. So I know there were challenges associated with that.
Yeah, it is very different pace for me, but I will say, because I know she's on the line, I had wonderful role models like Frank Kaufman, who was CMO at Medtronic, to look up to. And, even though I had some hesitation in moving from my role at Stanford to this job, I could see the potential impact of bringing, AID to market would be just extraordinary and would be well beyond what I could do as a clinician and researcher. So it was, I think, within minutes of meeting you, I knew that it was as if everything in my life had prepared me for this role. So it was a pretty easy decision. And I am so grateful for it. But I think it always, when you start a new role or go into a new job or leadership role, that it does take some time before you feel comfortable enough to kind of feel at home. And yeah. I do find that, this job can be, I think in a leadership role, it is kind of lonely at times, because there is a kind of certain standard to uphold, and and then it's just different. But I think that, I'm encouraged by the colleagues that I have and the growth and being able to hire and influence the hiring of really incredible people within our company that has made it become and feel much more like at home, even though it might be strange to say that. Okay, what would you say was a pivotal opportunity or a role that you've had in the past that has really influenced you and made you really grateful for along your career path?
The single most important move I made in my career was to take an international assignment. And I did that early in my career. It was a lateral move. So I always suggest to leaders as they're building their careers not to get caught up in the title game. It's definitely doesn't work. Vice president means different things at different companies. And I've taken 4 or 5 lateral moves in my career, or even when I joined Insulet, down from a CEO to a CCO. And I did that for the learning opportunity or for the ability to make an impact. But I took a management position in the United Kingdom over originally the UK, and then grew into Northern Europe, and then grew into Europe. And the experience of figuring out how to lead, how to be successful. We all refer to Europe, but it's 50, 60 different business models, different cultures, different go-to-market strategies. And so to figure out how to succeed in that and inspire people and connect with people was professionally and personally just incredibly expansive for me. And I think set me on a different trajectory than I would have been if I had not done that.
Okay, great. I think we're going to take some questions from the audience. Kelly, will you join us for that?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. And I love how these questions are getting really personal. So thank you, Stacey. Thank you, Stacey, and both of you two Trang. I think there's a bunch of questions in here already. I wanted to ask if you guys have already talked a lot about. I know in and around discussions that we have had over time, selecting board members, things like that, Stacey, that you weren't quite doing it like you are now, and you recently brought on someone at your board who is the president of Howard University. I remember when I saw that, what a step and what a statement about all of the work that you've been doing on DEI. Can you guys talk about that a little bit before we go to maybe some of the questions that are more product oriented and so forth? That was a big move, wasn't it?
Yeah, I'd be delighted to. We are thrilled to welcome Dr. Wayne Fredericks to our board. He's a relatively new addition, so I think we announced that about a month ago now. And as Kelly said, he's president of Howard University, also sits on the board of Humana and a couple other early stage companies, just an incredibly accomplished leader and surgeon. And what is maybe remarkable about him, we did a search. So we found him through what I would say traditional channels. We've worked very closely with the same search partner for most of our board development work. So he knows Insulet very well, knows our culture on the board and in the company. And he was really helpful in connecting us with a slate of unbelievable candidates. But we joke because we think, if we set out at the beginning of the search and said, I want a very established surgeon, I want an experienced board member, and I would like for him to also be a potter. I think the gentleman leading the search would have rolled his eyes and thought we were all crazy. But in fact, that's what we found. Dr. Fredericks was attracted to Insulet because of our mission. He developed type 1 diabetes in his early 20s and became a podder. And so very connected to Insulet, to our product, and brings to the board not just his viewpoint as an MD and as a CEO of Howard and as an experienced board member, but also brings the patient viewpoint right into the boardroom, which I could not be more thrilled about. And then, of course, he's an African-American leading an Africa distinguished, maybe the most distinguished African-American university. And I think for us, that was very important. You know, I would say Insulet is nascent in our DEI activities, but don't mistake that for not being incredibly committed. And so we think, you know, his perspective on a number of levels will be important as we think about what we want to accomplish over the next 3 to 5 years.
Got it. Yeah, there's so I know so much to go into those decisions. I know there's a lot of interest. Shacey, just switching gears here, as a leader, you know, you're in the artificial pancreas, you know, you're in closed loop in a big way. You're in insulin delivery. Let's make it better. The question is from Vanessa, as a leader with research there, you know, what does it take to invest in research versus growth? We've been hearing a lot about that this morning from Dexcom as well in their investor meeting. And I know they're a partner of yours, but if you could talk about that a little bit, that would be great.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I view them both as the same thing, frankly. We need to have a healthy research muscle, a healthy innovation muscle. And that is true for early R, not just D. And we have matured as an organization, thankfully, and have a great operating mechanism in place to be able to allocate investment research or investment dollars for early stage research. And then as that research becomes more promising, to fund it more completely so that it progresses into development and ideally into into an area of making impact in the market and commercialization. I will say, you know, when we think about our mission is to improve the lives of people with diabetes. And so that's not just insulin delivery. We have to be thinking broadly about, you know, what this will look like 5, 7, 10 years down the road, and funding research and development so that we can continue to make good on our mission for many years to come.
Yeah, I love that. It was so cool when you came in the field and I felt like you just read the room, you know, and people might have said like that Insulet would never be where you are now in the closed loop. It would never be in this very traditional sense of, you know, of humans not putting input into it. And
it's a great point, Kelly. It's a great point. You know, the actually even Insulet before I arrived had the point of view that an artificial pancreas would never happen. I can't tell you how many people when I first arrived at Insulet told me that we would never be able to put the algorithm on the pod. Our early concepts had a separate wearable. They had what we called a backpack on the pod. And so it's a great reminder, and that's why we need to be funding the early research. It's a great reminder that, you know, we can't conceive of what is possible in many cases just a few years down the road. And so we have to be actively investing in research so that we can uncover those possibilities and make them a reality.
Yeah, no, it's so cool to hear. I love this question. I guess on a related note, it's about, you know, being risk willing. Did he ask this as a woman leader? Do you see a barrier when you are the most risk willing in the group? And anything from you or Trang on that would be great.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I do think we are aligned as a management team on the level of risk. And it's a constant discussion because to Trang's question earlier, the appetite for risk changes as the business complexion changes, as we become more mature, as we have more customers. And in my mind, it is really important to have mechanisms to be able to take risk comfortably. And that's, you know, what encourages an innovative culture is getting people comfortable taking risks. Frankly, that's an area that Insulet is working on. You know, we've had such high stakes challenges facing the organization, like product quality, where failure was the stakes for failure was so high that maybe we were a bit overly punishing of failure and not learning enough from our failures. And so that has been a lesson for me is to, you know, if we want to encourage innovation and risk taking, we have to be very careful about how we how we react to failure. How do we celebrate it? How do we celebrate the learnings? Somebody described having a funeral for good ideas, the ones that don't make it into commercialization or into funding, because that I think is how we get to continue to, encourage innovation.
I think it also it's important to get those new perspectives in, because I do think if you have the same archetype of person running functions, then you're just not going to get those newer ideas in. And, we all have a story, we all come from different experiences, and people's comfort level with risk differs from based upon their own experience. I mean, that's how we make decisions, based upon our experience. And so that's why it's just so important to get different perspectives on that and make a data-driven decision. But, at the end of the day, sometimes it's a little bit of feel as well, But I think the different perspectives have really helped us, because some of us are from traditional med device world, and then others of us have never done anything like that before. And there's just a different assessment.
One of the things, though it's so funny, Trang, because you're so data-driven and fact-based. I mean, in all of the clinical trials, I got to be in with you and all of that. And yet you're really seen also as a leader in thinking about human factors. And I can tell that every single time I talk to you. This one is from Michael Johnson. Insulet continues to grow rapidly. How do you approach scaling to meet all the customer needs? What would you say to that?
Well, I look at that through two lenses, and the first is talent. As we think about, Michael makes a great point. The business changes so rapidly and it happens so quickly. I mean, I described just what the business looked like just 6 years ago. We were a 10th of what we are today, right? Maybe less than a 10th of what we are today. So it is incredible hyper growth. And so our strategy has been, let's hire 12 to 18 months ahead of a need where we can. And let's try to hire an individual who has seen the next 10 years of the story. And that talent, that leadership will allow us to build and invest ahead of the growth and have a team who can grow with the company, help us look around the corners and build and scale and make the right investments. So I think it does come down to talent. Then the other thing I would say is we make a great effort in our organization to connect every single person in the organization to the customer experience. So that whether you're working in HR or you're working in manufacturing, you have the opportunity to wear a pod. Every single new hire talks extensively to the executive team, and we remind them about the burden of this disease, and that every single thing you are doing in your job, regardless of where you are either adding to that burden or you are lessening that burden. And I think if everybody really understands that, then the right decisions get made, even as we are growing really rapidly.
We only have time for one more question. That really speaks to me, Stacey. Thank you. I think this last one is for you and Trang, and maybe we start with Trang and then go to you. But the last one that is, as a female leader, what has been the most significant barrier in your career, and what did you do about it? That's from Tamika Smitch, and I know we only have a couple of quick minutes here, but. Yeah.
Well, I'll answer that one, but I don't think it's going to be a very satisfying answer. So maybe then I'll kick it off to Trang, and maybe she'll have a better one. But and I know Tamika, she works at Insulet, so I could certainly talk more extensively to her about this. But in my career, honestly, it has been more of an advantage to be a woman than a disadvantage. And I don't just mean that because people are looking for board members and leaders, and that the future is female. I mean that because I really deeply believe that better decisions get made with diverse teams. And so being the only woman in the room, they're lucky to have me and my diverse perspective. And that as we think about leadership today and over the coming years, empathy, flexibility, characteristics that, many of us might identify as more female than male are more important than ever. And so I really believe that we're in a strong position, and all those advantages outweigh all the disadvantages, which I have also experienced, right? I have experienced probably everyone. I've been the youngest person, the female person, underestimated, but more good than bad has come from being a female.
I get asked this question and I always really struggle to answer it. I don't think it's been a disadvantage for me personally. I mean, you guys, I was a doctor in Perth, Western Australia, minding my own business, and then, ended up at Stanford doing research with Bruce Buckingham. And then, now I'm medical director at Intellect, just because, I continue to strive for excellence and do all of that. And so I don't think that being a woman has been a barrier at all. I do think representation does matter, and I have been fortunate to have wonderful role models and have an incredibly supportive boss in Shacey to inspire that confidence and build my confidence in being able to achieve everything that I do, and provide me that support. And that's what I really look for in mentors, to really help build my confidence as a leader, I'd say.
Thank you so much. Both of you are also really brave. You're really brave, and I think you're brave in ways that you don't even think you need to be brave. And I have benefited so much from watching the two of you in that way in particular. Thank you so much for all of these learnings. I've been scribbling furiously, but I'm really so excited to introduce today's kind of what we're calling emergent theme, very timely post-election health policy forecast for 2021. So our health policy keynote is Maura Carlson, Managing Director of Health Policy at Center for American Progress, that's CAP. This is a really leading firm in Washington, DC, that is really nonpartisan policy institute. She's written widely, you name it, JAMA, New England Journal of Medicine. She's been very senior in federal healthcare administrations, having served in the General Counsel's Office of HHS. She was lead counsel on Medicare and the ACA. She's expert on so many different questions that are relevant to us in diabetes, on payment reform, transparency, to the broader employer-sponsored insurance, you name it. So she's trained as a lawyer. She graduated from Harvard. She went to Hamilton for undergrad, and we cannot wait to hear more about all of just her thoughts at this moment, given who she's represented: healthcare payers, providers, manufacturers. And joining Maura to moderate the Q&A is Jane Adams. She's the VP of Federal Government Affairs and Canada for J&J. Jane joined J&J in 2003. Since March 2016, she's directed all of J&J's cross-sector federal policy and advocacy portfolios. So that includes a lot, as you can imagine: medical technology, consumer health, biopharmaceuticals, and she's really responsible for all federal enterprise policy, political, and advocacy initiatives. And Jane, for some of you who know her well, she is also really an expert in diabetes. She's had it herself since age 12. She has been very active with JDRF as well, serves in several capacities for the local and national JDRF organizations. And she got her undergraduate degree from University of Vermont and master's degree in public policy from Georgetown. So I'm going to hand it over to Maura, and I can't wait to hear what you both have to say. And you can also start filling up the chat, everyone in the audience. So over to you.
Thank you, Kelly. Thank you so much. I mean, what a amazingly kind introduction. And thank you so much for inviting me to join the kickoff event here. So I'm not going to really have any slides. I just wanted to pull one up if we could do that right now, just sort of go over what I'm going to talk about, very top level. Then we'll just take it down, and hopefully it'll be more conversational. I mean, the first thing, I just wanted to set the scene a little bit. Obviously, this session is entitled Post-Election Healthcare Policy Forecast. We're not quite in the post-election space yet. There are 2 Senate runoff elections in Georgia on January 5th. The outcome of those 2 elections are going to determine which party controls the Senate. I'm going to get to what you might expect under either scenario later in this session when I, at the end, as you see possible legislative action. The other thing I think that's really important is any healthcare action at all, whether it's coverage or affordability, is going to be secondary to the absolutely unprecedented task of rolling out an evidence-based national response to the COVID-19 pandemic, including distribution of the COVID-19 vaccines. That's why right now, if you ask anybody in DC what the Biden administration's healthcare priorities are, it's number 1, COVID, number 2, COVID, number 3, COVID, which is of course good news for getting past the pandemic. It's good news for people living with diabetes because as we've learned in the last 9 months, people with diabetes are just more likely to unfortunately have some serious symptoms and complications from COVID-19. I will say that regardless of the outcome and even though COVID will obviously be the priority, there's still just going to be a ton of opportunity to reshape other parts of the health policy landscape through administrative action. So for that reason, I'm going to start by going over some of the more recent news on I always make that mistake, President-elect Biden's healthcare nominees and appointees, and then focus most of my time down on that bullet possible administrative actions. I'll try to highlight a few that might be particularly relevant for people living with diabetes. And then kind of moving back up to setting the scene, in addition to the immense challenges posed by COVID-19, we need to keep in mind that whatever actions the Biden administration may take could be upended by a pending Supreme Court case that's challenged the constitutionality of the ACA. And that came up in light of Congress setting the individual mandate penalty at 0 under the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, which was passed about 3 years ago. I would say that based on last month's oral arguments, there was a fair amount of optimism that the court's not going to strike down the entire law. But I just wanted to add that to setting the scene as something to kind of keep in mind as the case is still pending. And I think that's all I just wanted to flag on the slide, and we'll just kind of go into the first personnel as policy bullet. You might be wondering why I put this topic before the substantive discussion of the policies that might be passed. And it's because, as I said in that bullet, personnel is policy. That expression was first coined during the Reagan administration by President Reagan's director of the Office of Presidential Personnel. And it's just the individuals selected to lead the administration's COVID response and the rest of the healthcare departments and agencies. They are the people shaping the policy, and just like every other human being, their backgrounds will inform their decisions and their priorities. It's also, I think, a signal of what Vice President-elect Biden has for his priorities and how the administration is going to approach healthcare policy moving forward. I will say that these appointees face additional challenges, not just the COVID-19 response, but there is a real depleted career staff in a lot of these departments. So they really have a huge task ahead of them. They need to restore trust in these agencies, return to evidence-based policymaking. So it's a really monumental challenge, and it makes these personnel decisions, I think, even more important to highlight as part of this conversation. As Kelly said, it's really amazing the timing of the session, because just this week we found out about some of the key senior members of the health team. First and foremost, President-elect Biden has obviously selected California Attorney General Becerra to run the Department of Health and Human Services. I think I've seen a few stories about this doesn't make much sense. He's not a healthcare person, but that cannot be further from the truth. Before he was California's AG, he was a member of Congress. He was on the Ways and Means Committee, which is one of the key House committees. It has jurisdiction over both Medicare and Medicaid. He was a longstanding member of the committee's health subcommittee. He's also he was a very active member of the Congressional Diabetes Caucus. He's also, since his time as the AG in California, he's focused a lot on protecting access to healthcare and lowering healthcare costs. He's challenged a number of Trump administration policies. But in addition to those federal lawsuits, I also want to flag that he's used some of his enforcement and merger oversight authority to secure some interesting commitments from healthcare systems to implement policies that address social determinants of health. Another flag for this group is he's also been public in his support for using what's called March and Rights Authority. In the case of COVID-19 treatment, remdesivir, that authority would allow other drug makers to manufacture remdesivir in the hope of injecting some competition into that market. In addition to, I'm just going to flag 2 or 3 other people. Dr. Vivek Murthy is once again nominated for Surgeon General. He served in that position under President Obama. He's another person who's really been very focused on social aspects of health and disease. Dr. Marcela Nunez-Smith is currently one of the co-chairs of the Biden Transitions COVID Advisory Group. She's going to continue on a very similar role and be the chair of the COVID-19 Equity Task Force. Her life's work has been focused on racial disparities. And I think one interesting flag for this group is that her research has included some deep dives into outcomes and disparities across all sorts of different healthcare chronic conditions, but including diabetes. And just another really fascinating part of this is really the first time that any administration has appointed a senior level official of this level to really work on health equity. And she's really going to be working with the rest of the COVID-19 task force on every single aspect of the response, including treatment of vaccines and reopening schools. And then the last person I'm just going to flag is Dr. Rochelle Walensky. She's going to be head of CDC. Unlike AG Becerra, she does not need to be confirmed for this position. She's currently the head of the Division of Infectious Diseases at Mass General Hospital in Massachusetts. She's a professor at Harvard Med. She's been on the front lines of the COVID-19 pandemic response in Massachusetts. And some of her writing and research during this time has been calling for more investments, again, focused on the equity of distribution of the COVID-19 vaccines. And I've pulled out these specific pieces because I think it's important that they underscore President-elect Biden's focus on addressing health inequities and this link between public health and the healthcare system. And I think that they really send a really strong signal that you can expect this administration to really prioritize ways to improve the health of at-risk populations, which of course include people living with pre-diabetes and diabetes, in a way that I think past administrations, both Democrat and Republican, have not done so. We're still waiting to hear about other really key appointments that I think will be really important. The Center of Medicare and Medicaid Services, the Food and Drug Administration. Just yesterday, we learned about the names of who President-elect Biden is going to nominate for Secretary of Agriculture and Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. He is going to renominate Obama's Secretary of Agriculture, Tom Vilsack. One thing again, he is a huge proponent of the SNAP program. Since the pandemic started, he's been really outspoken in the press about really expanding access to SNAP benefits as part of a way to really ensure food security. Congresswoman Marcia Fudge from Ohio is going to head HUD. She's not a quote unquote health person, but housing security and housing stability is one of the key social determinants of health. So just, I think that all of these nominees have not just had experience and leadership capability, but you just see this thread through with this eye towards equity. And I think that will probably inform that. And now that we know the kind of thinking the vice president is coming up with and putting forward these nominees, I think the next question is, so what are they going to do when they're in their roles? I'm going to really speak about 1 or 2 examples. I only have 20 minutes and I could probably talk about this for 20 hours. But I'm just going to use one example or a few examples from the marketplaces and Medicaid and then Medicare. I do think, again, going back to this idea of personnel as policy, the nomination of Attorney General Becerra is, I think, really yet another signal that one of the key priority areas for the administration is going to be undoing Trump administrative actions that destabilize and were attempted to undermine some of the ACA marketplace policies. I mentioned the Supreme Court case that's pending before the Supreme Court right now. Attorney General Becerra is arguing on behalf of keeping the law in place and arguing that the law is, of course, constitutional. But I think all of these just underscore and send another really clear signal that you can really see the administration coming out really quickly, really aggressively to undo what they see as sabotage of the Trump administration. And I think one of the things is we'll see this happen over the course of the first 100 days and over the course of the first year. I mean, some of the changes that I think that will happen immediately can be done unilaterally. So for example, the administration can announce a special enrollment period to allow more people to enroll in marketplace coverage. There's been some areas where there's been less information about the ACA on HHS's website that could be immediately restored. Other actions are going to take longer. The Trump administration adopted a number of regulations that encourage the sale of insurance plans that don't meet all of the ACA's requirements. The Biden administration is concerned about those for a number of reasons. They look attractive because of their lower premiums, but they are cheaper for a reason because insurers can vary the price of those plans. They can refuse to sell them to people who they think are going to incur higher costs. So, people with diabetes could be denied coverage by some of these plans. They also raise costs for those who need comprehensive coverage because they can cherry pick out the healthiest people from the marketplace. So people remaining in the marketplace will on average be sicker and older. So that in turn raises marketplace premiums. So that's one of their top reasons for wanting to address these plans. So doing so, they're going to have to go through a regulatory process called notice and comment rulemaking. They'll issue a proposed rule. They'll ask for comments. They will review the comments, and then they'll publish the final rule. So that's going to take several months at a minimum. And that's just one of numerous changes to the marketplaces that they'll probably want to do. And then in addition to the rollbacks, they're also going to want to take positive steps to make coverage more affordable. One issue that we've heard a lot of talk about even since the Obama administration is the adoption of what's called standardized plans. So when you go to healthcare.gov or another marketplace, you see all different sorts of options. Some have higher premiums, some have lower premiums, but higher cost sharing. The thinking behind having a standardized plan is that even though this choice can be really helpful, too many choices can just be choice overload. So the idea is to create a standardized benefit that has the same cost sharing across all different insurers so you can just compare premiums. This has happened in a number of states already. 6 states, Washington, D.C., have standardized benefits. And the reason why this could be particularly helpful for people living with diabetes is because a lot of these plan benefit designs are designed to encourage things like drug adherence, chronic care management. Some examples you see are separate deductibles for drugs or monthly out-of-pocket limit for prescription drugs. So I think that's one thing that you won't see immediately, but is probably the type of change you might be able to see in the next year or so. Moving on from the ACA to Medicaid, I think you were going to see the Biden administration also focused on reversing Trump administration Medicaid policies. These are going to be a little bit more complicated to unravel because Medicaid is a federal state program. So the federal government gives the federal law gives the Secretary of Health and Human Services the authority to waive some federal Medicaid requirements to allow states to test new ways of delivering care. One of the examples prior to the Trump administration that was kind of the classic example is states used this waiver authority to move their enrollees from the traditional fee-for-service program, meaning the Medicaid program pays doctors and other providers directly for the cost of providing care into managed care organizations. But the Trump administration used these to really advance some longstanding conservative policy ideas. The most well-known that you've probably heard about in some of the trade press and things like that are work requirements. So essentially, if an enrollee doesn't submit documentation that they had a job or met an exception, they would lose coverage. Arkansas was the first to have these waivers. There's been a fair amount of analysis showing that this results in coverage losses. It doesn't necessarily increase employment. And for those reasons, I think you're going to see the Biden administration act very quickly. But in this case, the waivers, again, are challenged in court. The Supreme Court just agreed to hear arguments about whether or not these waivers were properly approved. So this is another kind of complicating factor in how quickly they're going to be able to move. And I'm giving these examples because what I'm trying to do is present a picture that there's just a lot of competing interests. There's a ton of priorities, and how these priorities and how these different policies are staggered not just reflect the priorities of the administration, but also just reflect a lot of the outside surrounding pieces, and most importantly, a lot of the litigation surrounding some of these pieces. In terms of proactive Medicaid pieces, the Biden campaign was pretty vocal in asking for additional federal support for the Medicaid program during the pandemic. I think you'll see the Biden administration work to encourage states to submit waivers that encourage more holistic thinking about care and health, new ways to link enrollees to non-medical services. I would absolutely expect to see waivers require closer tracking of racial disparities, improvements in racial disparities, things like that. Just turning really quickly to the Medicare program, the Biden administration will have the ability to test additional policies similar to the Medicaid waivers in the Medicare program through what's called the Innovation Center, and that's part of the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services. The Innovation Center was created by the ACA, which is interesting because despite the Trump administration's opposition to the ACA, they've used this authority to advance a bunch of different reforms. The model that's probably most familiar to a lot of you is this year's senior savings model. And that's the model that under which a plan can participate and they will cap out-of-pocket costs for insulin at $35 for 30 days. The Innovation Center has tested a fair number of new ways to pay for and deliver care for all sorts of different chronic illnesses, including diabetes. The Medicare Diabetes Prevention Program model is a behavior change intervention that really aims to prevent the onset of type 2 diabetes in Medicare beneficiaries. So I think that you'll absolutely see those types of models continue. But I think that there are other models that I think the Biden administration will take a much closer look at and think twice about moving forward with. There is a very technical rule that basically changes, it's focused on the different rebates that occur during different parts of the prescription drug distribution chain. There's been some analysis that that intervention may increase Part D premiums. So I think that that's one place where you'll see the Biden administration kind of kick the tires and see if there's something there or if they just want to move beyond it. I will just move really quickly. I know I'm running out of time. I just want to turn back to possible 2021 legislation, which is, back where we started with the Georgia specials. If the Democrats win control, obviously, if the Democrats win both seats, the shift, it will be a 50-50 split in the House, in the Senate, with Vice President-elect Kamala Harris providing that 51st vote. Conversely, obviously, if even one of the Democrats loses, Senate remains in Republican control. That's important because whoever controls the chamber continues to control which legislation comes to the floor and which doesn't. The other thing I think that people forget, but's really important to remember, is the Democratic majority in the House is super narrow. So any sort of legislation moving even in the House is going to need near unanimous consensus to get to the floor. In the first scenario, meaning the 50-50 split, I think you could see some very additional targeted healthcare bills that build on the ACA. There are some bills that have already passed the House that would increase the amount of tax credits available to people who buy insurance. But I mean, given the razor thin margins of control in both chambers, more ambitious legislation is just not going to happen this Congress. I do think you'll still see a strong push to find ways to expand access to people who would receive Medicaid coverage if their states actually expanded the program. There was some interest last year in moving forward with bipartisan lowering drug cost legislation. You might see some of that move forward if the Democrats take control. I think under either scenario, one of the areas you might see some additional investments in is biomedical research. I mean, given the President-elect's commitment to the cancer moonshot, and also just a highlight of the importance of biomedical research given the COVID-19 vaccines, I think that's one area where we might see some movement. If the Republicans remain in control of the Senate, I think, clearly any improvements to the ACA are off the table. And in this case, I would think mostly some very targeted healthcare related pieces on vaccine distribution or helping some providers recover to some really big hits they took earlier in the pandemic. You might see some targeted action to address drug affordability, but I absolutely would not count on it. But that's a ton. I realize I spoke very quickly, so I understand that people probably have many, many questions. I've barely scratched the surface, but hopefully I've given you enough to kind of provide a framework for analyzing future actions that happen. Thanks.
Great, thanks so much, Maura. Hi, everybody. I'm Jane Adams. What a privilege and honor to be here today. That was a tremendous overview, and I agree with Maura. We could speak for hours about. There's so many fascinating policy debates and the new administration and new leadership roles. We probably need a subsequent session to follow up. But I really wanted to say thank you to Kelly and to the whole WILD team. What a great acronym, by the way, yeah. To allow me to moderate some of the questions. I see that they're already coming in. So we're going to have just a few minutes before we go to Michael to have some of these questions answered. And I did want to just share maybe why I'm part of this conversation today. And as Kelly mentioned, I lead federal government affairs for Johnson & Johnson, world's largest and most diversified healthcare company. But the reason that I'm here is because I'm a patient. And I have been since 1980 when I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. And while I was diagnosed in a small town in New England, I was the only person I knew with diabetes, didn't even really know what it was. And back then there was no glucose testing, there were no finger sticks. You had to drop a urine in a test tube and it told you whether you were really high or really low about 3 hours ago. There was, a one injection regime, there was no insulin delivery, and really by kind of just by luck and by chance, I've been able to have, 41 years of health, having children, and I think most importantly, having a passion for patient advocacy. And that led me not to hide my diabetes, but instead to embrace being a patient. And that led me to being able to work in Washington over 30 years for some of the most incredible organizations, both in the nonprofit sector and also in industry, that include the Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation, the National Association for Biomedical Research, as well as Medtronic. And I've been at J&J 17 years, really the gold standard of organizations dedicated to health and healthcare on behalf of patients. And so that's really why I'm here today. And again, 30 years in DC plus, and living with diabetes for 41 years, I feel that it's a responsibility to actually take something that could be seen as adversity in childhood and turn it into something that you can translate into both a personal commitment and a professional career. So thank you again, Kelly, for having me today, and for all of you to tune in. So I have some questions, but I actually see that we're getting some in the queue. So I really wanted to maybe pick up more on what you talked about as far as the new administration and investment in NIH and medical research. And I think for those of us who were engaged in the doubling of the NIH efforts in the 90s, we wonder about your thoughts about continued investment in research across the board from a federal perspective, both congressionally as well as what the administration may think about that.
I mean, I just think that, as I said, I think it's real. I think this is always a really important topic. I just think there's a real chance for advocacy and to make this happen right now, given the confluence of a president-elect who has really focused on this, made the Cancer Moonshot his signature piece after his son passed away. And also, there's just been a lot of conversation in DC among health policy folks who are not really bio or pharma experts, but thinking about, wow, these COVID-19 vaccines came so fast and were so successful. But, really it was years and years in the making, right? So it was, research that occurred on these RNA technologies that have been really funded for ages. and really thinking about the entire span of R&D. And I think that those two pieces and the fact that people are actually just really talking about really thinking about long-term investments in this area, I think it is something that has really shifted the conversation. I think once Vice President Biden became the nominee, I think people sort of started thinking about this because of the Cancer Moonshot. But I do think that, you know, there's just been a lot more discussion about this right now than I've heard in quite some time.
Great, thank you so much. And just as a reminder, Maura will be part of the breakout sessions after this, so you'll be able to have a little bit more one-on-one interaction with Maura at that time if you can move to the breakouts at 5:30. So one question is, how do you believe the Biden administration may prioritize patient-centric policies and, you know, kind of patients themselves amidst the Biden-Harris proposed policy agenda that I think, you know, most of us have seen, and what role might patient advocacy play in the new administration and the new Congress?
I mean, I think that absolutely 100% patient experiences are going to be really important. I'm not sure if people remember this, but when Vivek Murthy was confirmed as Surgeon General last time, and this is just one example, he did a listening tour essentially of patients around the country, and, you know, really thinking about it. One of the areas he highlighted that he'd really heard from so many people about were people living with diabetes. So I think that that's going to be just infused at every level. And I think that you also have practicing physicians, you know, for example, Dr. Walensky, who has really been front lines, saw what happened, has seen what's happened in ICUs with COVID patients. For patient advocates, I do think that there is just so much to be done, that it's really important, I think, to prioritize. And to the extent that any advocacy community can coalesce around shared priorities and shared asks, I think it's really it's always important, but right now, given the sheer number of things that they're going to be addressing, you know, having a set list of priorities so you really can make the most of your advocacy, I think, is going to be really critical.
Great advice. And one question that came in is, Maura, if you can say more about the administration's hopefully potential focus on social determinants of health beyond appointees. What levers will the administration use to advance work in that space?
I think that they will use, I mean, they have a number of different levers in different parts of the government outside of HHS. In terms of HHS authority, I would say the Medicaid waivers, and then the CMMI authority I mentioned. And then there's another waiver authority that's part of the ACA. So I think that I think you will see a lot of work with states in particular, and then states with localities to really figure out how to weave together some of these pieces to do some different outreach and kind of linking these services together. One of the really interesting examples right now is North Carolina. And interestingly enough, the North Carolina Secretary of Health is actually on the short list, I'd say, for Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. But the state of North Carolina has done this very interesting piece where they're basically they're requiring their managed care companies to contract with community-based organizations. And those community-based organizations actually have to take high-risk enrollees and actually connect them with housing, connect them with food, connect them with transportation. So I think that that is one of the things that I think you'll see. I think you'll see a big focus on trying to measure what some of these social determinants of health, how some of these interventions with social determinants of health change. That's a whole nother huge problem and huge area of debate. But I think that figuring out the measurement in particular and figuring out which interventions really work and which don't, I think will be a priority.
Terrific. We have a question about any governmental directions in regenerative medicine spaces such as cell therapy.
That is beyond what I really know about. I mean, that's more of an FDA question, and my kind of sweet spot is more on the coverage and payment side. So apologies.
I will just add,
you actually might know.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think there's great, not just hope, but we're actually seeing regenerative medicine in practice. And so there's tremendous, I think, bipartisan, bicameral support. And I would anticipate, based on everything Maura laid out as far as the incoming administration, just significant support for innovation, federal investment, but regenerative medicine, I would put at the top of the list for sure. So we're excited to potentially see that. Next question is, what perspectives do you have on cross-therapy advocacy that could impact health policy? And maybe as a follow-up, what other fields, sorry, I'm just reading, have they been most impressed with cross-sector advocacy, patients, researchers, clinicians, and manufacturers?
I would say advocacy across what I would call strange bedfellows is probably always perhaps the most persuasive and really helpful. Even just getting the Affordable Care Act passed, it was really a monumental effort across industry. I mean, having manufacturers, having hospitals, having doctors, having the patient advocates, everybody really supporting the bill. It would not have gone across the finish line without that. More recently, defending the ACA has been a similar collaboration, I think. One of the pieces that I think is also really helpful to think about is thinking outside the healthcare box. We've started to see a lot of focus, obviously, on health equity. And so there's additional collaboration, I think, with some of the Black-led organizations in the country, especially community-based organizations, and thinking about different interventions and thinking about healthcare coverage as a key racial equity issue. So I think that those are kind of trends you'll continue to see, because you can't, I mean, we all think of healthcare as being separate, but for people out in the world, you can't separate health from, you can't separate food at agriculture, your housing at HUD, and your coverage at CMS. So I think that thinking far more outside your silos is also just really, really important.
Great. One question is there anything that you would recommend that we look for in the first 100 days as it pertains to health policy that may impact people with chronic disease, with diabetes? I think we've seen some of the priorities that we believe will be of focus. COVID, obviously the economy, climate, social injustice. But do you see anything in the first 100 days that may pertain to healthcare?
I think you'll see, like I said, I think you'll see a special enrollment period potentially for people who need to be enrolled in coverage. I think you'll see, I think, some restoration of some outreach and enrollment services, especially, those that are culturally competent, making sure that people who, for example, people with diabetes who need to be enrolled in a plan that really has decent coverage, I should say decent cost sharing for insulin, for example, and really making sure that there are some of those navigators who can help people make some decisions about their coverage. I think you'll see a lot of those. The first 100 days, it's so hard because a lot of the changes need to be done via regulation, which takes time. But I do think that you'll see some initial steps. Every president enters with an executive order or two. I think you could see some executive orders calling for, departments to restore information, things like that. I think that it's going to be much more signaling, because quite honestly, the first 100 days, I think, is going to be all COVID vaccine distribution and figuring out how to get that out to people as quickly as possible.
Yeah, terrific. And we have a question on what do you see as the future of value-based care, and how might it be more deeply implemented?
I think that that's just one of the areas that there has been widespread bipartisan agreement on, that you need to start, the buzz is paying for quality, not quantity. I think it's much more difficult. When you drill down, it's a little bit more interesting. So for example, there is a lot, I sort of inarticulately mentioned this with the measurement issue, but to have value-based care, you have to measure it properly. And there's a lot of concern right now that some of the value-based measurements actually might have racial disparity issues embedded into the measurement. So extracting some of that out. So for example, a hospital might actually receive lower payments based on historical data if they have treated a lot of homeless people, because homeless people actually utilize far less healthcare. So their historical trends have this lower utilization baked into the bottom of it. So there's a lot of work to be done with making sure value-based care and value-based measurement can really reflect the need to address health inequities. I think there's also a lot of thought about value-based care and what is that value-based pricing? What does that mean in the pharmaceutical industry? Is it, looking at the underlying prices? Is it more of a mechanism for paying for more expensive therapeutics over a course of time? So there's a ton of work to be done in there, and it's ongoing. It's not as flashy or as high profile as a lot of the other pieces.
Great, and I think we just have time for one more question. So thanks for all the questions. And maybe just to this group that might be relevant is, do you have any advice for those who are in the diabetes community, in particular, perhaps in industry, how they can be most valuable to incoming lawmakers, both in the administration and Congress? You mentioned the emphasis on evidence-based medicine, obviously data collection, and good science policy, but anything from an industry perspective where there may be a different belief or consideration in information coming from industry directly. Any advice to folks on the call?
I mean, I think industry is one of the biggest sources of that data and that information. So, just being, I think, I don't really see any difference in terms of industry versus other sources of information. I think that, again, even with data, I think that having those priorities is really important. Like, there are so many problems, and this isn't just data, but also with, for example, like the career workforce in Washington, D.C. has really been depleted over the last 4 years. And industry is going to know that and where the gaps are more than any other group, probably, because you are the regulated entities. So, for example, if there's an office at FDA that is really in need of leadership, if there are people who you used to work with at CMS in terms of coverage decisions and that office has been gutted, I think it's not just like flagging data and evidence, but it's also kind of flagging and helping and being a partner in rebuilding some of these offices. I think is going to be really important and a real value add for the industry.
Great, thanks so much. I think our time is up, but again, more is going to be part of the breakout sessions. And so I think with this, we'll turn it over to Michael, and really look forward to hearing from you. So thanks so much for the session, it's terrific.
Thank you so much.
Huge round of applause to Maura. I think that was a phenomenal update. Thank you so much. And really, I just wanted to go ahead and extend a huge thank you to Insulet and our speakers from Insulet, as well as Kelly Close and Lori and the entire team at Close Concerns and Wild for hosting this event. Another phenomenal event, kicking off with Sahar. I got to tell you, it's, I don't know, each time you keep raising the game on us. This organization is so critically important. It's important for me. Diabetes is something I care deeply about, given the role it's played in my life and in my family's life. It's critically important to our industry because diverse voices ensure that we help everybody, right? And when we help underrepresented groups and support underrepresented groups, all tides rise, all boats rise. And I see Wild as a tremendous opportunity for us in the industry to have a chance to do that. You heard that I'm the head of diversity and inclusion for Abbott. I've been in that role for just a few months. Before that, I was the head of HR for Abbott Diabetes Care. It was a great joy to be part of that organization to help people with diabetes live better lives, their fullest life, really. And I know that with the mission like we have in Wild, a mission associated with diversity and leadership to maximize the outcomes for people, I know there is nothing that can stop us. I know Abbott was early on in jumping into this. Katie Spade was a huge proponent in this, and we did it because we've seen how diverse populations can unlock value and potential and opportunity and support people like no one's ever seen before. We've personally seen it in our careers. We see it in our company. And but we know we're not the only ones that feel that way, and we would love for people to join us. So for those of you that are attending in your companies, please tell your companies to come join and be part of something really special. Be part of something that when we look back in our industry 10 years from now, we can say we were part of making that happen. None of us want to see 10 years from now an industry and say, wow, I wish I would have done something. We don't want that. And here is an opportunity for us to stand up and be counted. So again, I'd like to extend another huge thanks. And I will turn it over to Mary Ellen McQuaid to introduce our next speaker. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Michael. It's always very hard to follow you because your enthusiasm is so high. But I am incredibly enthusiastic about our next speaker. But just a quick introduction. My name is Mary Ellen McQuaid. I have the pleasure of leading the human resources team at Novo Nordisk. And we too were an early sponsor of WILD. And I hope that all of you are getting a lot out of today. And I know in 2020, it's hard to pause to take any time to invest in yourself. So I say thank you to all of you for doing that. I'm super excited about the next speaker. Jennifer Aaker is here to join us. She's a tenured professor at Stanford Business School, and she's just written a book called Humor Seriously. And I'll let her tell you more about it. But the reason why I jumped on this opportunity is those people that know me know that I am very into cracking some jokes all the time. Sometimes they work. Novo Nordisk, as you guys may know, is a Danish company. I figured out what makes Danes laugh and what doesn't make Danes laugh. But I really believe in bringing some levity to a workplace. And we spend a lot of time at work. I used to say, I spend more time at work than I do with my family. That may not be true anymore, thanks to 2020. And now I wish I spent a little more time at work or somewhere else besides this very nice blue room. But I do think humor is incredibly important to making our work life and our personal life tolerable, fun, and just bringing joy. So I was super excited. And with that, Jennifer, I pass it over to you and look forward to your talk today.
Wonderful. It's so great to be here. I was able to listen for the last hour. It was incredibly inspiring. So I wanted just to share some concluding thoughts for these last, sort of 15 minutes. First, I want to ask you a question. Go ahead and pop the answer into the chat when you have a chance. It's not rhetorical. So the question is, when was the last time you really laughed hard? So you have 10 seconds. Go ahead and pop that moment into the chat. Okay, this is inspiring. While you're finishing writing up these questions, I wanted to share a story. For nearly all of my life, my mother has volunteered for hospice. So I grew up hearing stories about what people wish for in their last days of life. We're what you call a really fun family. So my mom's role was to really be able to listen to what people wish for and why they wish for it. And her job was to see if she could actually create that. And so as I was listening to these stories, one of the themes that I heard time and time again is that people wish they had not taken themselves so seriously and they had laughed more. And remember, this is in the last days of their life. So I wanted to sort of leave you with that. It spurred me to spend 20 years of my life really trying to understand what brings about meaning in life and what creates happiness in life. What are the difference between those two things, and how do we create more meaningful lives? it was in that process of research that I came to understand how fully important humor is, not just as a way of creating meaning in life and mitigating regrets of the dying, but also as a tool in business, one that is underutilized and incredibly important. But here's the problem. We have fallen off a humor cliff. In one study run by Gallup with 1.4 million people and in 166 countries, they found that people, when asked the simple question, did you smile or laugh yesterday? And how, frequently do you smile and laugh? They find that people have the answer, yes, I smiled and laughed yesterday, when they're 16 and when they're 18 and when they're 20. And then all of a sudden around 23, we all globally drop off a humor cliff. It plummets and it doesn't pick up until we're about 80 when we retire. So that is 52 serious years. And the thing that's really remarkable is if you think about 4-year-olds, I don't know how many of you have toddlers, but the average 4-year-old laughs 300 times per day. The average 40-year-old laughs that many times in 2.5 months, which is horrifying. Because the upside of humor is enormous. In leadership, when people use humor at work, even with the beginning anecdote you just introduced me with, they're 23% more respected and seen as more competent and confident. And the bar is so low, it doesn't even have to be good humor, just not inappropriate humor. And you still get this windfall of increased perceptions of competence and confidence. For employee retention, employees who rate their bosses as having a sense of humor, and it could be any sense of humor, just like a sense of humor. They report to be 15% more satisfied and engaged at work, and they rate their bosses as 27% more motivating. In sales, studies show that people pay on average 18% when people negotiate with just a lighthearted line, like my final offer is X and I'll throw in my pet frog. Remember, the bar is so low. And when it comes to innovation, studies show that teams are more than twice as likely to solve a creativity challenge if they laugh together first, or even just thought of a time of shared laughter. So by the way, you should be highly creative in these next 10 minutes. What's more is the risks of not using humor are significant. There was one recent large-scale Norwegian study conducted over 15 years that asked people to rate themselves as having a sense of humor or not. And what they found was the individuals with a sense of humor, and this is Norway, not known for its humor, they lived 8 years longer and were 30% more resistant to severe disease. And because of that humor cliff, those are 8 years that are high quality, funny years. So laughter literally makes us more physically resilient, and it may actually be the best medicine after, actual medicine. So a lot of this is chemical. When we laugh, our brains release a cocktail of healthy hormones, dopamine, endorphins, oxytocin. And this changes not just how we feel more calm and confident and resourceful, but how others perceive us as more influential and likable and trustworthy. Oxytocin, by the way, is the same hormone released during childbirth and sex. Both moments when evolutionarily, it benefits us from feeling bonded. And as an added bonus, laughter is the one way to release oxytocin that's still permitted by HR. So I know what you're thinking. You are thinking, is she telling me that when I laugh, I'm basically drugging myself? And yes, like Michael, I just saw you laughing there. You're extremely good at laughing. But when you do that, you're also drugging your colleagues. So it's an extra big win. But it's in a way that actually really is great for our businesses and relationships, because that's another thing about laughter. When you share laughter, or even just writing in that moment of memory of shared laughter, it quickens the path to friendship and makes us feel closer. So clearly humor is powerful, and not just that, it's free. So how do we start climbing out of the humor cliff? First, we teach a class on this, my colleague Naomi Bagdonas and I, and we wrote a book on it as well at Stanford Business School. The class is called Humor Serious Business. And the first day of class, we asked our students to do an audit, which is the most fun audit ever. And the task is simple. For 1 week, they just jot down every time they either laughed or made someone else laugh. it's devastating the first week. One of our students said, on Tuesday, I did not laugh once. We knew a class on humor could be so depressing. But over the time, they report having much more laughter in their lives. And it's more than just becoming funnier. It was that they became more generous with their laughter. It was a shift being on the precipice of a smile rather than a frown. The second thing, and I'm gonna have you guys do this in the chat. What you're gonna do is you're going to pop in the chat what humor style you have. So the first is stand up, and they are expressive and bold, and they're natural entertainers. Then there's sweethearts. They're subtle and affiliative. They're earnest and honest. They avoid humor that might risk hurting feelings and don't love the spotlight. So their humor often flies under the radar. Then there's snipers. They're subtle but aggressive. They're edgy and sarcastic and nuanced. They're unafraid to cross a line to get a laugh. And then there's magnets, and they are expressive and warm and uplifting. They radiate charisma while avoiding controversial humor. So you have 10 seconds. Go ahead and put in the chat what you think your main humor style is. Okay, we got a lot of sweethearts here. I know that Kelly is a sweetheart. Fantastic. A couple of quick things. One thing that's interesting is that each of these styles have strengths, but they also have weaknesses or risks. So for example, snipers and stand-ups, and by the way, male leaders tend to self-categorize more as a stand-up or sniper. There's lots of exceptions, but it's, you know, an average across individuals who are Americans. This is just a study done with Americans. And what they do is they oftentimes use humor as a form of intimacy. Like, I'll tease you, and that's a sign of liking you. But if they're actually teasing with someone who's maybe a magnet or a sweetheart, oftentimes that humor can be seen as either offensive or miscommunicated. And similarly, magnets and sweethearts, which oftentimes female leaders often rank themselves as, they tend to often use self-deprecating humor. And when you do that, in high status roles, it's often powerful, but when you overuse self-deprecating humor, especially in low status roles, it can oftentimes hurt you or hurt your overall sense of power. All right, the third tip is to create small moments of joy for someone else. Especially if you're finding trouble having joy in your life right now, look to create a small spark of joy for someone else. These can be tiny gestures, like a virtual background of a fun shared experience, or even sharing that memory. Right after this, I want you to, whoever you had that shared laughter experience with, just say, I took a mini class from Jennifer Ocker at Stanford, and she forced me to recall that memory with you. And that will actually have a huge impact, even on their day. So what you're trying to do is telling, you know, basically a small sort of thing that would be not even funny, just bring about some humanity and some joy. When you do that for others, it has an extraordinary impact on your life. And then lastly, be more generous with laughter. Practice navigating your life on the precipice of a smile. Don't try to be funny, just look for moments to laugh more generously. Michael, again, is very good at this, I can tell. Before closing, I just wanted to go back to the original story I shared about my mom. What was so fascinating in all of my research is that I found that humor doesn't just mitigate one regret of the dying, it really mitigates the 4 others. People on their deathbed say they wish they had been more bold. Humor diffuses tension and it makes negative emotions move more quickly, so we're able to take bigger and bolder risks. People say that they would wish they were more authentic. Humor helps us share parts of ourselves that are unconventional and true. And when we're finding joy, we care less about what others think and more of what we believe. And then there's presence. Humor requires us to be fully present, to listen hard, to search for hidden truths in each moment. And last is love. people wish they had the chance to say, I love you one more time. And when you have humor in your life, we often find love is not far behind. The leaders who do this will create healthier, more productive, more joyful places to work. And individuals who practice this will create more meaning in their lives, which is why it's time to take humor more seriously. Thank you all so much for this time. I'll pop into the chat some actual resources for you if you want to figure out your own humor style or learn more about this work.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. This book is incredible. It's not out yet in the US, but I got a special secret copy, which is so cool. And Jennifer gave us a whole bunch of them. So we have a lot to send to you. We're going to ask you to fill out the survey and then send it to you. That's how we're going to do it, because we want to make Wild as great as possible as we can for everyone here and for your colleagues. So the books are a little bit hostage, but you can still get them as soon as you fill out the survey. So thank you for that. And Jennifer, gosh, thank you. And I know that it's a really cool quiz that you take at the back that they developed. Jennifer is an amazing scholar. She is so humble, but it was really a lot of her very early research on happiness that really started a lot of the focus in the whole, broader business community, I would say, and even broader than business, of course. But the book is amazing. The book is also hilarious. And I read it a couple of weeks ago, Jennifer, but it's so funny. I'm not known as a funny person in my household. In fact, I'm kind of known as Mommy's unfunny, because that's what I think. But I learned a lot from this. It was really cool. And I'm so glad that you and Naomi spent this time doing it. So I'm going to say that again, learning is the most powerful tool we have to improve the outcomes of people with diabetes. And that was my goal when I founded Close Concerns back in 2002, which many of you helped me with. So thank you. Later co-founded the Diatribe Foundation in 2013, and I was a co-founder of DQ&A in 2009. That was all about making people smarter about diabetes. And I said, you just heard a little bit from Valentino. One of my decisions was I was not going to barricade the door because all of you would understand that he would be in and out. Every day, each of our organizations, Close Concerns, Diatribe, DQ&A, is dealing with information, insights, sharing it with different people in different ways. Today, we were so moved, and so many of you in the room had a lot to do. Well, we'll start with standards of care from 88, seeing the standards of care, seeing greater focus on social determinants of health, seeing greater focus on moving toward ending really long-term complications like CKD. Seeing so much focus on technology. Things are moving. Rome is burning, but things are moving. It was also absolutely fantastic to see releases coming out about progress on GLP-1, progress on CGM, AGP. We're talking about getting healthier. We're moving toward so many pieces of that. And so thank you to everybody. We reach about 10,000 leaders and their teams every day through Closer Look. If you're not getting that, let me know. You can just write us a chat about that, or to Kira Wong, who is the associate in charge of Wild. But we're so grateful that all of you are here. And I'm also so grateful that I get to have a hand in sending so much about what all of the field is doing to people with diabetes over at Diatribe. I think there are over 15,000 patients now being tracked at DQ&A, and sharing how patients feel every day has just been really, really gratifying for me to be able to be a small part of with that leadership from Richard Wood and a whole slew of amazing women. So when I look back on what we have built, I know that continuous learners become continuous leaders. Our country, the US, just elected our first woman and woman of color as vice president. And Kamala Harris, in her new job, has to and gets to build new skills. And we get to see her do it. And, I think the same the same need to kind of grow and evolve faces us at this moment. Diabetes is changing rapidly. We've been at it a long time. And I just went through some of those pieces about, moving toward better eye health, moving toward better behavioral health, moving toward better kidney health. It's becoming more interdisciplinary. It is absolutely becoming so important for us to work in and around diabetes. So we're welcoming many different women here today who may not be right in the center of diabetes, but are also working on in and around it, on the edges of it, that are also so important. It's just like that, the wind is blowing a different way. We as patients never got to think about preventing complications and using technology to prevent a complication, using therapy to prevent a complication. There are even therapies out now that have as their primary outcomes prevention. So that's a big deal. I was talking to David Lee Strasberg about this, as some of you might know. He kind of said, as he does in his droll way sometimes, we've come a long way in diabetes when a key issue is data security. You better believe it is, because automation and machine learning are becoming so big. We're welcoming so many younger people into the field as well. And I know that is exciting to all of us here. So we're all stretching, right? Wherever we are, we're required to stretch. And I'd say we get to stretch. So I'm going to try to speed through, because we have so many exciting conversations planned for you. So I'm going to post some of these remarks that I would love for you to think about, and we would love to hear your input on as we move closer to better patient outcomes. And we know that a big way of doing that is also evening the playing field. So we've been happy as we have seen more women advance into higher leadership in diabetes and various elements of diabetes. And I know it also can be much higher than this. And so we want everybody to be able to progress at every level. We'd say, some of the things that are changing less rapidly, that is our field's representation of women leaders overall at the board level. Okay, so we want to be at parity. We need to set targets and be accountable. So 24% of Fortune 500 healthcare company board directors are themselves women. Only 2.5% of those are women of color. Healthcare is among the lowest performing industry in that regard. So, but women representing 65% of the healthcare workforce and only 13% of the CEOs, that's not enough. And I know that it's going to get better, that it can get better. And I decided that we were going to be at Close Concerns have that as one of the things that we were deliberate and intentional about working on it as best as we could. There's some new data out just from Close Concerns this morning. If you peek at the green box, you'll see some of the statistics. If you're interested in seeing where your company is, please be in touch with Kira Wong or me in the chat, and we'll get that to you. We're going to put the report out next week I want to make sure that we're actually reporting not just on board leadership, but also on leadership at the highest level on the in the executive division in every company. So I don't want to get that wrong. And to drive change, we need all of you to help us. So you're an entire population of women leaders. We really believe, from speaking to you, we recognize that women across the diabetes ecosystem, we know that people want greater opportunities for community, connection, inspiration, and learning. We hear you. And so we're here to help with some of that. And we're really, really grateful to the different organizations out there who are helping us with this, because we need to keep asking and we need to keep pushing. We're going to need plenty of grit, and we won't do it alone. I know that in 2020, we're doing better. Now, women make up 22% of board directors in diabetes. The progress is starting to show. But what I'm supposed to be excited about is the fact that, there were no manels at a big meeting. That's not good enough. And I know that all of you can help us work toward tracking that better and reporting on it better. That is where we'll get to listening to the targets that are being set and listening to the leaders be really thoughtful and intentional about how they want to change this. So we know as individuals, we must continuously learn, adapt, and evolve within our super dynamic field. And I love it that WILD could be at least a small part of that pipeline to leadership positions in and around diabetes and healthcare. So WILD is our network to elevate and advance senior and emerging women leaders and their teams working in and around diabetes. And we want to do this with the other organizations that are at work on this and to highlight and amplify what many of you are doing. Women's networks, I know you guys know the facts, but just to reinforce, they really have been shown to enhance women's careers, increase employee retention, improve, physical and emotional well-being. And it's time to invest even more in our women leaders in diabetes. It's happening. And so, we want to catch a wave and help make that happen even faster. We're going to work toward making diabetes leadership the example for parity in healthcare leadership. So each one of you is here to carve out your own unique path. You may be here to enhance your leadership skills, to build connections, perhaps work toward a nonprofit or private or public company board seat. You may want to mostly elevate other women leaders. You may want to lead more. You might want to support more. And whatever your goals are, I am really confident that you'll each find inspiration and support in our WILD initiative. And we know that your skills and commitment and vision will improve the lives of patients everywhere, reflecting that greater leadership. And we also, I hope this goes without saying, we have so many allies out there. Their leadership is obviously so important as well. And we had so much help in putting together today with the help of a lot of allies. So today is just a sampling of what we hope to share with you over the next year. The women will speak with you today are not only themselves excelling in their careers and continuously learning, but also they're learning from you. They're, I hope, going to be learning from WILD as they also participate in this community today. Like, what is the most exciting part for me? We're in community together, and it's happening because of the leaders agreeing to speak. So their teams are here with us in the audience, and thank you to all of you. Our keynote speakers, Shacey Petrovic and Trang Lai. Dr. Trang Lai will share the stage and share their perspectives on leading Insulet as a high-powered female team. And of course, their entire team is a really big deal. There are not very many women CEOs out there. Maura Coulson will speak to the state of health policy in our country and where we may be headed. And she's going to be kind of buffeted and led in questions by the great Jane Addams from J&J, a long-time leader in policy. Then Jennifer Aker from Stanford is going to help us harness humor as a tool in our leaderships and lives. And it's so funny at our household, it's kind of, Johnny always tells me or agrees with me, maybe I'm unfunny. I got this book from Jennifer. There is so much great stuff in it. And I had no idea it had anything to do with business and with execution. We just got to hear from Sahar Yousaf from her fabulous opening on neuroscience techniques to superpower through 2021. A lot of you were lucky enough to be here when she was a keynote speaker at our pre-launch event, and you can look for that on our website if you didn't see it. And that's closeconcerns.com/wild. So we will be using the chat feature in Zoom a bunch today. So type in any questions or comments that you have to everyone. That includes asking questions of our speakers. And we're going to do as best as we can to get to a bunch of questions. We wish we could be here in person, but this is not bad. We encourage you to turn on your video cameras if you can, so that we can feel more connected. And if you can't, it is completely fine. It will be particularly helpful about halfway through the program, and that's when you're going to be able to connect with other women and a few allies too in the networking sessions. Starting at 5:30 Eastern, we're going to have a second set of optional networking sessions. Those are going to be about really cool, it's going to be really cool skill building. So, and you'll be able to see that on the agenda. So take part in whatever you can. Come, go if you need to. We would never be so presumptuous to feel that everyone could stay here, but we do hope that you will be able to share the recording once we send it out to you. Of course, none of this would be possible without our founding sponsors. That's Abbott and Novo Nordisk. I just wanted to say again, thank you so much to our amazing team at Close Concerns for putting this day together. And we send huge thanks to Abbott and to Novo Nordisk for really believing in the idea of WILD. And I'm so excited about where we will be able to go. we're sending you a survey. I think it might even be going out just in the next even few minutes. So when you get it, we'd love for you to just take a few minutes with it, and then we'll be able to understand much more how you would like to see 2021 and beyond. But thank you so much. And I hope everyone is also really proud of the day that happened today when the new standards of care came out from ADA. Some friends from ADA, I think, were with us a little while ago. And it's a big deal seeing all of these pieces change so that patients can be healthy, can get healthier, so that we can start with that. And I think it's really auspicious that we've been waiting for those for the last, we haven't known exactly when they're coming out, but that they came out today, and there's so much goodness in them. We're really, really headed toward patients having so many better short and long-term outcomes and lives. And I know that is what our sponsors really believed in when they said that we could move forward with this, with women, more women leading. It'll be small boards, bigger boards, all of the bigger leadership positions at companies. It's huge, and what you all can do. I'm watching it, I'm seeing it, and I'm just thanking for you for your outsized work on behalf of women and patients and people who need help with their health everywhere.